If you write classical music and notate your works in a music notation editor, chances are your piece may end up sounding something like this. Basically, all of my earlier works sound like a robot. There's no expression, and this lack of expression makes it hard for them to stand out. But it doesn't have to be this way. You really should be aware that the music you create just won't sound right if you neglect to nuance it. But what do I mean by nuancing? Stick around because I'm going to walk you through 6 things you should be aware of when writing your next piece. But first, let's listen to a nifty side-by-side comparison of what a non-nuanced work sounds like versus a nuanced work. You're going to notice a few things here. First, the instrument sounds are very different. The non-nuanced version is using the standard synth sounds that are integrated into the sound card. And the nuanced version actually uses individual note recordings of sounds that are being streamed through a specialized software known as a software sampler. As a side note, Jotter aims to create its own standalone software sampler that would be integrated with Jotter, and that would be available to those who already have access to Jotter. I am aiming this to be a Kickstarter initiative. So let's go through the list of 6 things that you need to be paying attention to if you want your music to sound legit. The first obvious thing would be your instrument sounds. Now you can enhance your sound a few ways here. The easiest method would be to use a sound font file. Sound fonts can be loaded up and streamed through a software sampler. They also may be utilized directly by your music notation software. The most important thing when dealing with these specialized sounds would be low latency. This is incredibly important because the lower your latency, the smoother your playback is going to be. There are also tricks to reduce latency, one of those tricks being to utilize something called a virtual Midi port. Jotter has plans to delve into this technology when it's ready to begin working on its playback. So I just want to show you an example now of Jotter scrubbing Beethoven's 5th Symphony using the virtual Midi port technology with higher quality instrument samples. Jotter will not only give you the freedom to compose on your desktop computer or web browser, but I'm also developing a technology called music scrubbing. Music scrubbing is where you drag a play bar across the notes and you hear them play at your own pace. This technology is so easy to use, it's going to change how you write music. Take a look. You're going to instantly notice here that the latency is minimal, making the composition process fun and seamless. So when your music is actually being performed, such as in this work composed and performed by Henry from Young Composers, I'm going to put links in the description below so you can check out Henry for yourself. Notice all the natural tempo changes just from his performance. You're probably saying to yourself, but Mike, I already put tempo change markings in my music. I take care of that already. Well, yes and no. On paper, you mark the tempo change, but in reality, a real performance has continuous tempo changes, even if they are very subtle. And this is part of what makes playback sound authentic and filled with emotion that you just don't get with your standard MIDI playback. Now I get it, adding in all of these subtle tempo changes is difficult to do, but that's why you need to follow me, right? Because I know how to address these issues, and Jotter will be fully capable of handling these types of situations. So if you do in fact value good playback with your music, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe, because the more support I get around this initiative, the quicker I can move along with this technology. Henry's work and performance is perfect for this demonstration because his playing here is helping me demonstrate my points. This is such a great piece of art and is filled with expression. Just listen to how subtle nuances in playing can really add a sense of musicality to a piece. But anyway, let's now talk about subtle continuous velocity changes. When you put down a dynamic marking, let's just say forte, for example, you aren't going to be playing at exactly one velocity on all of your notes until your next dynamic marking. In reality, performances will have subtle variations around your target velocity, making a performance have greater musicality and feeling. But a computer playing back Midi won't know any better, and if the composer thinks that placing standard dynamic symbols is going to be all that's needed to emulate a performance, that composer is greatly mistaken. On paper, yes, this is fine, but in terms of actual playback, again, we need subtle changes in velocities to emulate that musicality that you hear in a typical performance. So here's an example of a chord without any attack. And now here's an example of a chord with an attack. In words, attack is when we don't play that note exactly on the beat. We may be very slightly off the beat, and the same goes for a chord. When playing a chord, we most definitely don't always play all the notes of a chord at the same exact time. They may be slightly rolled or arpeggiated. So I want you to listen to a phrase from my ballad without the attack. And then I want you to listen to it with the attack. And I just want you to hear the subtle differences. Do you hear the difference? These differences throughout an entire piece will contribute to making your piece sound more authentic. And by now, I hope you are starting to see how there is so much more to playback than just the instrument sounds alone. Then we have duration changes. An example of a duration would be this. Imagine you're in 4/4 time. This means that each quarter note is one beat. Now pretend we're playing at 60 beats per minute. This quarter note is actually played at one beat for every second in this situation. Now a robot can play Midi at the exact tempo and get every note duration to be exact as well. But even performers who are really good with timing won't be this exact. They may not be exact because they have subtle timing errors, or maybe they play with a certain level of expression, or it could be a combination of both. So part of nuancing Midi playback is by deliberately changing the note durations of your playback. So instead of a quarter note playing one beat for every second, you may have that quarter note play that beat in, let's say, 0.92 seconds, or maybe 1.2 seconds. And applying this technique throughout your entire piece will in fact make it sound more authentic. Again, I urge you to listen to Henry's performance here. What makes this performance great is the fact that it's expressive and is played with a certain level of character. This level of expressiveness and character can't be achieved using your typical Midi playback unless that Midi playback is nuanced correctly. And finally, we have something called musical tuning. What I mean by musical tuning is the ever so slight pitch changing of a specific tone of a note. When making small tuning adjustments, we use the unit of measure called a cent. So the interval between two adjacent notes is called a semitone. For example, on a piano from note B to C would be a semitone. And the number of cents between these intervals is 100. So for every 100 cents, it's going to give you the next semitone. As an example, if we tune the note C by 3 cents, it will still sound like C, but it will be slightly off tune. And this technique can be useful if applied to your entire orchestral work, because players may not be 100% accurate with their pitch playing. Even a piano might be slightly out of tune. And this is where varying tunings of specific pitches will in fact help your piece sound more authentic. It definitely will give your piece a certain charm to it. So I hope you now understand how nuancing your music is important to create a more authentic recording. Music Jotter will in fact aim to solve these problems using these 6 points. When I relaunch my Kickstarter project, it's going to be much more focused this time around, and the goal of the funding would be put towards playback specifically. And like I said earlier, I do have plans to create a standalone software sampler with Music Jotter's own virtual Midi port, and this would connect the software sampler with the actual notation program. But it's also going to give you a very low latent and super responsive playback. So everything discussed today in this video would in fact take Music Jotter's playback into a league of its own. And good playback is really important to me, so don't worry. This is all at the very top of my mind. Until next time.